Singer-songwriter Nick Drake is recognised by many as one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. The raw, sombre and melancholic songs he wrote during his lifetime continue to touch millions of people to this day. During his lifetime, however, Drake knew little success, and as his life was cut short, he left the world believing his work was a failure. Further adding to his mysteriousness, there is no video footage available of Nick except from when he was a child. In 1948, Nick was born to British parents Molly and Rodney Drake. Music, creativity and self-expression were highly valued in his home, as Molly was a pianist and his older sister, Gabrielle, would grow up to be an actress. Nick wanted to follow suit, and from a young age he was able to play saxophone, clarinet and piano. Growing up in this loving upper-class family, Nick had a bright future ahead of him. It was when Nick turned 16 that he first picked up the guitar. This would be the instrument that gripped him and never let go. Being very literate, Nick started writing his own songs, inspired by poetry and philosophical ideas, which he studied in his free time. The poets and philosophers he was gripped by reflected his troubled but rich inner life. Nick was strongly moved by the deepest emotions of life and concerned with existential questions. Though Nick was able to make plenty of friends throughout his life, there was always a mysteriousness about him. No one knew what was truly going on inside his head, not even the people that were closest to him. The only way he felt free to speak his mind was through his music. Most of his nights were spent in gloomy environments with closed curtains and solitude, where all he'd need would be his guitar and pen and paper so he could write and play songs all throughout the night. With his interest in literature, in 1967, Nick decided to go and study English at Cambridge. Teachers would soon find out it was impossible to make Nick care for a conventional career. All he really wanted to do was make music, and so it was during Cambridge that he rigorously worked on his first album. Nick liked to perform his new songs for small audiences, and through this was discovered by fellow musician Ashley Hutchings. Hutchings recommended Nick to esteemed producer Joe Boyd. Boyd was immediately blown away by the talent of the young Nick and wanted to produce the album Nick was working on. Boyd would be an important person in Nick's life from that point forward, as it sparked hope into his silent desire of becoming an admired musician. Titled 5 Leaves Left, Nick's first studio album was released in 1969. The title 5 Leaves Left refers to old Rizla cigarette papers that would remind you to restock your papers when they began to run low. More strikingly, the last 5 years of Nick's life had dawned. 5 Leaves Left is characterized by Nick's impressive guitar playing and poetic lyrics that explore topics like childhood trauma, unrequited love, and a search for belonging. Even though the now 20-year-old Nick struggled with his past and existential questions, he at least had high hopes of becoming a successful musician. At the same time, his gut feeling told him that fame and success were things that would only be recognized after one's death. He contemplates this idea in his song, Fruit Tree. Fame is but a fruit tree, so very unsound, it can never flourish till its stalk is in the ground. The first time his gut feelings were starting to take shape was when his debut album, 5 Leaves Left, sold poorly. Joe Boyd was determined to make Nick a success, so he changed course to make a second album that would be more commercially attractive. Background vocals and additional instruments were added to make the entirety sound more like other music from the time. This album, called Brighter Later, was released in November 1970. Despite all efforts, the album again performed poorly. Nick was deeply hurt by the lack of recognition his albums received. Management encouraged Nick to play live gigs in an attempt to get his career off the ground, and so he did. However, there was little left of the Nick who liked performing by now, as he started to take his lack of success personally. His live gigs were now fueled by self-doubt and anxiety. He would come on stage only to avoid eye contact with anyone, and on several occasions left the stage randomly without saying a word. His frustrations grew immensely by his own lack of confidence, while he felt unable to do anything about it. Spiraling further into his depression, Nick started using antidepressants on top of his already excessive drug use. Despite Nick's declining mental state, he never stopped working on music. By October 1971, he had a full album ready to be recorded once more. This would be Nick's last, yet most personal and intimate album, Pink Moon. Any hope left in Nick of becoming a successful musician had faded to a minimum at this point, so he took full control of how he wanted the album to sound. No more background instruments or supporting vocals. All Nick wanted to use for Pink Moon was his guitar and his voice. Pink Moon was a personal necessity. All the feelings of loneliness, depression and frustration he felt are poured into this 28-minute-long album. When Nick entered the recording studio for the album, producers were shocked by his appearance, which had significantly changed since the last time they saw him. He had long fingernails, unkempt hair, and barely looked anyone in the eye. The only thing that seemed to remain were Nick's musical skills. The recording process for the songs was done in just 2 nights. Nobody had high hopes of the album doing well. Shortly after the release of Pink Moon, in early 1972, Nick suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. Once released, Nick moved back in with his parents. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "I don't like it at home, but I can't stand it anywhere else." More of his gloomy state of mind during this time came to light in a conversation with his mother, where he told her in desperation, "I've failed in every single thing I've ever tried to do." Nick became detached from the world and spent most days alone in his bedroom, where he could stare at a blank wall for hours on end. As the autumn of 1974 began, things seemed to go a little bit better. Nick decided to go on a trip to Paris. His parents, Molly and Rodney, were delighted, as things finally seemed to be getting better for their son. Upon his return, however, they encountered the exact same Nick. Molly and Rodney were starting to feel helpless, as they felt there was nothing they could do to cheer up their son. A few weeks later, on the 24th of November 1974, Nick went to his bedroom early in the evening to do some reading. When he laid down for bed, he was unable to sleep like many of his other nights. On this particular night, however, something in Nick's mind got so unbearable that he decided to take in a large amount of his prescribed antidepressants. The next day, Molly entered Nick's room to wake up her son, but by this time, Nick had already been dead for several hours. Whether Nick's self-inflicted death was deliberate or an accident remains unclear to this day. His life was cut short at the age of just 26. Remarkably, a copy of The Myth of Sisyphus by French philosopher Albert Camus was found next to his bed. The opening line of that essay reads, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy." Camus concludes that essay by saying that one should revolt against suicide by embracing the absurdity of life. Sadly, Nick died that November night, and we can only hope he found comfort in the writings of Camus during the final hours of his life. Nick's ashes were buried on December 2nd, 1974, by the company of his friends and family. After this, the story of Nick Drake turned silent for a long time. In the shadows, a few dedicated believers kept promoting the work of Nick Drake. But it wouldn't be until the mid-80s, over a decade later, when prominent musicians started to take hold and credit the mysterious Nick Drake as an inspiration. At last, his legacy started to pick up steam, so much so that by the 90s, Nick's music started to be used in commercials, TV series, and Hollywood movies. To this day, his songs are still widely used in these mediums. Perhaps most importantly, as Nick saw his own life as a failure, his music today touches the lives of millions, helping them through times of depression, loss, and hardship. Nick achieved this by pouring his unfiltered thoughts into his songs. How many of our own words do we leave unspoken? What are the things we should have done, but didn't? The life of Nick Drake reminds us that even when our own lives seem meaningless, we can still have an unimaginable impact on the lives of others through our words, deeds, and love. And maybe this is enough.